welcome everybody to this session, aptly entitled Global Footprints, Shared Responsibility and the Social Contract in Asia-Africa Dialogue. I would like to introduce our moderator for this session, Mr. Gerd Trogelman, Manager Regional Program and Global Policy Network at UNDP's Bangkok Regional Hub. Over to Gerd to take us through this session.
Thanks very much, Belinda, and good morning to you all. Good to see you. In a fairly traditional UN setting, you all look very far away, frankly. So if you are sitting in the very last rows, please feel free to fill the seats a little closer, so that we're also able to get into a good discussion in the course of this cross-regional, cross-continental dialogue, which I have a pleasure to moderate. The session really aims to connect the business and human rights discourse in Asia and the discourse in Africa, to explore how we can learn from each other in addressing human rights risks for businesses. The session will highlight risks and opportunities for responsible business conduct and unpack the role Asian companies can play in ensuring the adherence to human rights standards when operating abroad. Our panel will discuss how cooperation on responsible value chains can be made more, can be facilitated across continents, share lessons and good practices in addressing and preventing human rights risks posed by companies operating in Africa, and in strengthening transboundary remedy mechanisms. I welcome to this panel from the left to the right, and forgive me in between when I jump. You'll get to know colleagues very quickly. I have a pleasure to introduce a very esteemed colleague, starting with Ms. Sophia Alatas. Sophia is the Director of Human Rights Instruments Development and Evaluation in the Ministry of Human Rights of Indonesia. Welcome. Thank you for joining, Sophia. To my left, Mr. Alok Rana Singh, Regional Director for South Asia for the Ethical Trading Initiative, ETI. Thanks for joining us, Alok. On my immediate right, Padumdi John Oko, Deputy Director Legal for the National Human Rights Commission of Nigeria. Thank you, Padumdi, for being with us here in Bangkok. And on my very right, Kunbabun Sakulkarunarani. That's a difficult one to pronounce, so I will limit it to Kunbabun from here on, with Rekit Benkieser, the ASEAN Regional Human Rights and Sustainable Supply Chain Manager. In terms of the conduct of this 1 hour that we have, in order to stay within the time limits that we have, we'll allocate roughly 40 minutes to 2 rounds of questions to the panelists. And then if I do not fail in time management, which is also an implicit warning to my fellow panelists, we should have roughly 10 minutes for Q&A and open questions from wherever you sit in this room, and then close with some final reflections from the speakers. So without further ado, and welcoming also the last joiners to this cross-continental dialogue, I'd like to start, Alok, with you. In terms of the kind of the bigger picture, when you look at the global trade patterns and how rapidly they're changing, and the fact that companies are expanding their operations to other regions very, very fast, not just the big companies, but almost all across, and expanding into Africa. What are the key drivers for these trends that you see, and for expanding operations, and what are potentially also some of the risks that you see? I would, before you start, Alok, also just remind the fellow speakers, please aim at around 3 minutes in your responses. If it's 4, you're getting away with it. If it's 5, you may not. So over to you, Alok.
Thanks. As we all know, if you look at transnational companies, for a number of years, they have been looking out for different geographies, and somewhere it is driven by market, but then it is also about the factor of production. And that's where what we have seen that Asia has become a big market as well as a sourcing hub for most of the transnational companies. But in recent years, what we are seeing that whole economic growth in Asia is driving the companies from Asia to move towards other geographies. Again, for the same reason, they are looking at again a big market, especially Africa, that exists, and then the resources and labor hubs are again the motivation for which some of these companies are moving from Asia to African countries. Africa, again, for these companies, they provide young population, growing middle class, and rich natural resources, which is what, again, these companies, again, based on their experience of interacting with a lot of these multinational companies who are sourcing from Asia, are seeing these opportunities and are moving into Africa as such. But in terms of key drivers that we see, it is largely the diversification of the supply chains, and especially post-pandemic, we are seeing more and more companies again, moving away from different established supply chain hubs to different regions as such. So that's one of the reasons, and Africa again poses one continent where a lot of these opportunities exist for companies to explore. Second is again, some of the regional trade agreements between South and South, which is again driving this whole movement. Again, we are also looking majority of the Asian countries, they are moving towards green energy. But in order to increase the foothold when it comes to green energy, Africa does provide a lot of raw materials, especially critical minerals, which are required for green energy transitions. And then cost competitiveness. So somewhere the biggest motivation for companies has always been, lower cost, lower labor and land. And that's what again is a factor that is, promoting this. We have seen in late, Ethiopia being, promoted by some of the key financial institutions as a destination for majority of garment companies. A number of garment companies from Asia had moved to Ethiopia. Again, it was also as part of the drive to be nearshoring to some of the existing world markets. But then again, somewhere one has to understand that when you are moving and doing your due diligence, somewhere you also need to look at the cultural due diligence that, how that move needs to be adapted based on the culture that exists. Some of the legislation that you are working in your own country may be different in other countries, but then how do you also involve key stakeholders in these areas? And that's where the example of Ethiopia being a supply chain hub for a certain time was very, very important. And then, we all know how it fizzled down for, various reasons as such. So this is what I would say is the driving, factors behind companies moving to Africa.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Alok. So quite a number of points around access to resources, cost factors, regulatory, legislative type of issues, cultural factors, all to be taken into account as we kind of map out the background to this discourse. Maybe also just a quick word to the audience. As I'm addressing all the panelists by first name, it doesn't mean that we have been knowing each other for many, many years. It is an internal agreement among us at this panel. Sophia, in that spirit, let me turn to you. In Indonesia, your team has been working on the implementation of the national strategy on business and human rights. The strategy focuses on companies operating within Indonesia. Are you also looking at how Indonesian companies are operating beyond your borders to effectively manage human rights related risks? Over to you.
Thank you so much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Now Indonesia is preparing a new regulation, presidential decree about business and human rights. Before, the first one is National Strategy of Business and Human Rights will be end of this year. And the target, the first strategy is for the government, but the second that we still prepare it is direct to the company. The presidential decree we prepare, we not just making but with ourselves, but we try to communication with some CSO and NGO, the academy, and we have some mitra also from UNDP. We prepare for this new regulation because this regulation will be mandatory in 2028, but it's not easy for us to make the company to follow this regulation, but we have to try because Indonesia now preparing also for the OECD, and we know some of the company in Indonesia is the partner of international company, that some of the company has to follow the business and human rights regulation, especially for the due diligence. And also Indonesia have one tools we call Prisma, is self-assessment that company can follow the Prisma and check how the standard of human rights on their business, and we give the access, and then there's already around 300 companies to follow the Prisma, but the standard, I mean the score, not of the 300 companies is already green, but some of them are yellow and red. And then we try to manage the company and discuss with them to prepare for, the better to make a good. From some of the indicator, they don't have a standard for the human rights. I think that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sorry, you want to come back in?
Yes, I think some the example for the company is already include for the Prisma is mineral, the mining company, and also finance like bank. Some of Indonesian bank is already follow the Prisma, and I think some of them is not aware about the business and human, but they some, especially the middle until the small company is not recognized about business and human. So this is a big challenge for us to socialize a new, preparing a new regulation, and they have to aware about the business and human rights. That's all.
Thank you. I think this shows us how, on the one hand side, a lot of work is to be done in country, and Indonesia, you gave concrete examples in sectors and companies. And at the same time, many of those companies are embedded in an ecosystem of partners and others that connect within the region and then also across the region for us to take into account. Let me move to the right side of the panel. Pwadumdi, thank you for joining us from Nigeria. You're the Deputy Director for the National Human Rights Commission there, and you work on the protection and promotion of human rights in Nigeria, a hub for Asia-Africa trade. What are the most critical business and human rights risks that you are seeing, and what kind of legal and policy mechanisms exist to deal with transboundary issues from your perspective?
Okay, thank you very much, Gerd. Before I comment, I would love to unpack, some of the issues we're going to be discussing about. And, generally you understand that BHR issues cut across all kinds of businesses, whether it's multinational, whether it's state-owned, whether it's small and medium enterprises, they all have, although they have forces of good, but they all have issues of human rights that they deal with. And if we want to narrow it down to the discussion now, most of the companies or most of the businesses that cuts across Asia and Africa, as it were, has to do with some of the things that I talked about. Search for critical minerals, for the green energy, construction, extractive, which is a very major issue. And if you look at all of this, what are the major issues or major human rights violations that you can possibly see, and which is also happening, are issues of environmental degradation, issues of right to life, issues of displacement of people from their ancestral land, issues of land grabbing, militarization and security issues. So they are enormous. Lack of inclusivity, gender-based discriminations, the issues are enormous. And that's why, for me, I think the canvas for the NAP has been a very wonderful document to try and see how companies mainstream this document to help them cut and mitigate these issues that are bound to happen in the course of business. And in addition to, of course, the constitutional provisions of the land, we have like the African Continental Free Trade and the optional protocol on freedom of movement of people within Africa. And the ECOWAS courts, it's there to also give some issues of remedy to try and douse some of the issues that come up with businesses and especially host communities. We've had cases where there's been a lot of instigation by communities because they feel excluded, because they feel someone, like what is normally practiced is someone from the headquarters comes with a document, you've been allocated the land, and without proper, prior and informed consent of the villagers, you just, take away the ancestral land. And of course, nobody will want to sit down and expect that your property is taken away without adequate compensation. So this has always caused a lot of agitation, causing communal clashes and military intervention, sometimes state-sponsored, because of course you understand government wants to try and see how they can please the investor, and at the end of the day, the communities are at stake. And before you know what is happening, there are clashes and people's lives are lost. So there are quite a myriad of issues. And I would love as the talk goes on, we'll try to unpack some of the things and see how we can collectively bring solution to what's happening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pawundi. I think you're making it very clear how real these risks are. No? You're going through issues around environmental rights and degradation, issues around forced labor, issues around indigenous and local rights, community engagement issues, land grabbing, gender-based discrimination, and many more you mentioned, which I think help us set the context and make it also clear this is not a theoretical discussion. It's actually very, very concrete, affecting people's lives. Allow me, Kun Babun, to move to you and your experiences. You're working for a multinational company with operations in over 60 countries, and your supply chains cut across even more, I would assume. How do you ensure that your company's standards are respected all along complex cross-border supply chains? What lessons specifically are you learning, and can you summarize them briefly for us?
Okay, thank you. So I think I simplify this into 5 categories, which is like, so what, who, how, when, and why. So what do you do? So set up the policy that speak to your company value. I think, of course, it's aligned with different international standards. I think most of them, they don't differ very much. But for example, with Reckitt, we would prioritize anti-forced labor, anti-child labor, anti-human trafficking. We might be weak on gender, and this is something we work on, but we want to focus on what we want to prioritize, and we set up a clear policy on it. So now, with different regions, we focus on different sub issues. For example, in Southeast Asia, we focus on responsible recruitment. In Africa, we might focus on child labor. Then who in and outside your company you should engage with in order to implement the respected standards. Of course, it's sustainability team. Would you want to include your supply team, your legal team, whoever you think would be beneficials or should know, who should be responsible and take accountability on these issues. And then the big question is how. I think most of the corporate would be familiar with the controversial audit standards. There are pros and there are cons, and people are still discussing whether to adhere the audit standards or not. I'm not just going to go into that, but that is something the majority of the company will still do, including us. What I want to emphasize more is to enable worker collective voices as opposed to audit standards, because that actually speak to why we want to respect the standards. We want to provide workers with the labor rights, health, safety that they should be entitled to set up worker voice or collective voices for workers in different supply chains. It provide direct access for workers to speak to us, and they actually are the one who can tell what's happening and what should be fixed in the supply chain. The collaboration among brands also are important. I think with FMCG company, we fund organization to work for us on the issues of our interests. For example, this year we work a lot on price purchasing practice. We work a lot on fair wage. This is one organization where Reckitt, Unilever, Mars, P&G, Diageo, etc., fund for their expertise and their coordinations to work with the brands to capacitate and work as well with the supplier to connect between brand and suppliers to work together, because sometimes the commercial relationship, the politics between business come in between. So the nonprofit organization that we fund together would help. Technology as well is one of the key, because we work on cross borders, and technology would enable us to be cost effective, time efficient, but get into the core of our supply chain. For example, we buy a license where they can provide worker voice that provide access for workers to speak to us by scanning QR codes. Even for workers who are illiterate, they can just speak, and the technology would transcribe their words and send direct to our platform, and we would manage it. And so we would know that in which parts of the world we would want to focus on which issues. I think of course, before you invest, before you decide, you should conduct your risk assessment, due diligence. I think what is more critical is during your course of business with them, like how would you decide on if you engage with some suppliers or some business that do not comply, would you exit them right away? Or would you think that there are potentials of enable trust by capacitating them, by working with them to solve the issues together? Of course, there should be a time bound of how many years do you think that you can work and you can invest with them on. And then, of course, why? I think in addition to compliance, why do you want to do this? Because you want to attract investors, or because you want to have a better reputation for consumers, because you want to maintain talents, because you actually want to care about environment. So I think this is the answer to the question. So.
Thank you, Kumbail Boon. You are adding to the discussion the motivational dimension that you bring as a company to this, but also how you are trying to dovetail with your business objectives, of course. So that I think is an important component that complements the first round of comments to give ourselves a good, how should I say, overview of the type of issues that need to be addressed when we look at a cross-continental dialogue like this one. You mentioned in particular, Kunbaibun, the voices of workers, and that Alok makes me come back to you. ETI has been working on creating platforms that amplify voices of workers within these complex supply chains, as Kunbaibun outlined them. What existing models can rights holders use to ensure continuous stakeholder engagement? What specific examples could you add to this? Thank you.
Thanks. I think continuing from a previous speaker, global supply chains are very, very complex. And even within a sourcing country, what we need to understand that many a times these supply chains extend into tiers which are more and more individual. And we are seeing a lot of these, changes of late with the tariffs happening. There are repercussions of that, which really leads to, work going into hidden supply chains. A supplier trying to protect their margin would naturally be outsourcing the work. Even otherwise, we see, work going to home-based workers, subcontracted units. So somewhere for companies, it becomes very, very difficult to actually identify and have a meaningful conversation with workers or rights holders, which are completely individual and are much more vulnerable. And that is where, as ETI, we have been working in terms of creating stakeholder platforms, right from 2007 onwards, when we were one of the first to look at the issues of home-based workers and how we can actually bring stakeholders together. We were able to bring in suppliers, brands, NGOs, trade unions who were looking at addressing the issues that were being faced by home-based workers. Similarly, in the sandstone supply chain, I was talking this morning itself in another panel, we did have a hurdle when suppliers refused to go into a room where NGOs and trade unions were, largely because of the mistrust that exists among the stakeholders as such. So somewhere you need to work around the expectation which each stakeholder group has with regard to what exactly they want by coming together. And if you are not able to manage that properly, then it creates a challenge and that may fizzle out. And that is one reason why most of these efforts have not lasted long. And that's why companies would be hiring, consultants or consulting firms to bring stakeholders together for a day or two and then address it as a meaningful stakeholder engagement. Whereas a meaningful stakeholder engagement is only possible when you have that mechanism running continuously over a period of time, so that issues which are dynamic in nature can also be addressed when these stakeholders are meeting on a periodic basis. The initial mistrust that exists can go away once you start engaging, start understanding each other's perspective. And that's where our efforts has been to work separately with each stakeholder group, identify their perspective, look at the expectation they have, and try and find a common thread that can bring them together on a particular specific issue. Bringing them on a specific issue is important. Otherwise, it can go anywhere, and that's what we don't want. So bring them together for a specific issue and then take it from there. Gradually, they would have their own, structures. In Sandstone, these stakeholders decided to register it as an NGO, and it still continues to function independent of us, and all stakeholders, including brands, are part of it. So that's how, and then again, certain right holders like vulnerable workers, especially women and the Dalit communities, there has to be emphasis to involve their voices as well, which remains unheard. And as long as workers are not represented or do not have a union to represent their voices, it becomes challenging for companies to engage with them directly, and that's where the role of any facilitating agency or multi-stakeholder initiatives that can help guide those processes becomes very, very important.
Thank you, Alok. The term meaningful stakeholder engagement, I think, is a key one. Or what does meaningful really mean, or how do you make it meaningful? You both, Khun Baibun and yourself, spoke about how you use platforms to engage workers. It would be interesting, maybe Khun Baibun, later when we come back to you, you could also say a word to how effective this platform is for meaningful engagement, and whether or not the convening dimension that you refer to is also part of what you do as a business. But before we come back to the business, Sophia, you are a voice of government in this panel. A key challenge for governments, now that we have discussed the voice of workers, is the transparency of supply chains and value chains. When you look at managing corporate-related risks in the context of value chain transparency, what do you do as a government to increase transparency? What kind of practical examples can you share from Indonesia in this regard?
I think it's a bit difficult question. Now, as a government, because we have to duty to prepare policies, and then of course we discuss with many kind of organization and peoples, and also we have the first duty is to socialize the policies, and then we try to have a dialogue with the association of the companies. We call Kadin in Indonesia. We try to coordinate with them how policies will be implemented to them. And about the supply chain, if the supply chain is direct to the company, so the company has a duty to manage them and to choose the supply chain to be the partner of the company. But if the small company that we have as a government direct to manage them and give training, also socialize them about the business and human rights. But about the transparency, that between the company and the supply chain. But we have an indicator, one of the indicator of the new regulation is how the company has to select the supply chain, and they have to be, the supply chain has to have the standard of the human right. That's all for that we have to do it. But we have also have a minister about we call it UMKM. Maybe in here we call it SME, that we organize with them also how they can manage and how they coordinate with the UMKM or small company to be better and better and become one of the supply chain for the big company. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. So we have the kind of government dimension and regulations, training, trying to bring about transparency and alignment, if you wish, with national policies. The issue of stakeholder engagement, the kind of platform approach, let me put it that way, that we're hearing from colleagues, and how you actually make sure you hear the voices of workers in those chains. What we haven't really talked about is how do you access remedy? And in that sense, Pamundi, I would like to come back to you. You already spoke about key human rights challenges that you see in the Nigerian, but not just Nigerian, in the West African context. You spoke about ECOWAS, the wider region in Western Africa. What pathways to remedy do you see for communities impacted by operations of companies based in Asia? what kind of examples can you give? I think there's one side of dealing directly with national companies, and there's another one that is different when you engage with international dimensions of business.
Okay, thank you, Kat. It's, when the NAP talks about issues of access to remedy, sometimes it might just feel esoteric, until you're really faced with the practicalities of access to remedy. And like I was discussing with Belinda yesterday, we're just trying to air our views. And most people kind of confuse access to justice to access to remedy. They might be intertwined. They might mean almost the same thing, but they're not the same. Now, when you talk about remedy, it's not just about the judicial mechanisms that are in place to have remedy. You also have the non-judicial mechanisms, like the ombudsman, like the national human rights institutions, and the both national, regional, sub-regional, and international mechanisms that you can actually use to have remedy. And I must say, for our own country, we've had experiences where both communities have approached the courts in Nigeria, and somehow they didn't get the justice that they required or the remedy they required. They went to the sub-regional, to the ECOWAS courts, to get remedy. And they got the remedy. But another snag now is, after the remedy is gotten, how do you enforce it? And those are some of the challenges we talk about. So you could have remedy, but is it adequate? When they give you compensation, how is it paid? What is the timeline within which this compensation is meant to be paid? To who? How do we ensure that it gets to the right people? And that has caused a lot of disharmony between community leaders and the community itself, between multinational organizations operating within communities. We've had issues where because of the foreign direct investment that most countries are interested, some foreign companies have used a clever way of using artisanal miners for the extractives, to get what they want. And in the course of that, because of the crude instrument these people use, they have done a lot of havoc. There's a place called Zamfara in my country where there was a lead poisoning. They are still suffering the ripple effects of that lead poisoning. Although there have been some form of compensation, but it is still not adequate, because as it is, there's still concomitant reciprocal legal health issues that most people in that community are still battling with. As we speak, there's another oil well somewhere in Ondo State that has been burning for the past 5 years. And I imagine some oil burning for 5 years. Imagine the pollution that is happening in that environment. In fact, even the local remedy, the nursery, are not able to give effective remedy to the communities there, because it's something that would take a long-term planning, because they didn't envisage for that to happen. So in as much as we've had local remedy, the constitution of the country, the National Human Rights Commission has given some form of compensation to some people, it's still not adequate. It's something that we need to deliberately discuss, talk about how we can structure a remedial mechanism, and companies are made to stay true to it. On a normal day, you're supposed to have what we call remedial funds for you to be able to remediate the environment to some form of normalcy after your extractive processes. I'm trying to be focused more on the extractive now, because that is where most of the violations are coming from. In May alone, the Commission recorded about 256 complaints just in May. So you can imagine the number of complaints that comes to the Commission. We don't even have enough and adequate manpower to cater for this huge number of complaints. And that is just not the Commission alone. We have the various courts who are saddled with so many, issues that have to do with environmental degradation. The industrial court has to do with labor and unionization. So there is a whole deluge of issues, and it's essential that we have a cross-cutting approach to how we can give effective remedies to some of these issues. And that's why we have the ECOWAS Court, the African Union, the African Commission, using the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. So we have some of these instruments that are available for people to engage with. And we've seen cases where people have engaged with them and have gotten some form of remedy. Although not adequate, but at least it's a reprieve, it's a respite. And we can do more when companies learn to really, really respect human rights, to at least reduce the number of complaints that come.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Pardumdi. Based on what you just said, just as a quick follow-up question, if there was one practical thing that you would love to change instantly, what would that be?
I want every company that comes, whether local, national, to have, while it's coming, a roadmap on how to mainstream human rights into their operation, and they should learn to be accountable.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Kumbabun, that allows me to move to a company directly from here. No, when you take this wish that we tried and practiced before the session, and I still sometimes get it wrong. My apologies. Kumbabun, as a from a company perspective, and you hear this wish for a roadmap. What kind of advice would you give to companies who are moving or trying to access new markets while at the same time needing to adhere to human rights due diligence, but many issues beyond? Is there anything in particular that you can help make that roadmap a reality?
Yeah, I think I would just skip the human rights due diligence that have been talked about for the past three days. I think the more I want to emphasize is you would need to decentralize your corporate governance because this is a direct lesson learned from us that when you want, and also one of the panelists has speak about the culture due diligence. It's to speak in the business language, it's also about how to achieve KPI. If you want to achieve to enable local businesses to build rapport with a local community, you would need to do the due diligence on your culture. And how would you do that? It's that you decentralize your corporate governance. You have most of the time in a company you will see someone who is the global head of human rights. You barely see regionals or local human rights staff in a company, or any stakeholder that are well versed in implementing the practice. And sometimes, most of the time, the company would hire a local consultant, but those do not have decision-making power. Those do not have influential words in a company in how you would to manage your supplier, how would you want to treat or provide a roadmap. I personally work with a local supplier, and I'm from the Global South myself, and there were many issues that we are able to overcome when you enable a culture-aware dialogue. Because the problem is not that local suppliers or your suppliers do not want to do things that are against international laws or that are against the moral standards, but they do not understand why do they need to do it in your point of view, or in the international company point of view. They usually put a lot of burdens or responsibilities on them without trying to understand where they come from. And like you said, the time frame as well. The local company in Asia, in Africa, they do not have resources to build a Rome in one day. It needs your understanding in that sense. I think decentralizing is one thing, and if you cannot do it very quickly, to build a local partnership would be an alternative resort. We do fund local NGOs who work with us on fair wage, on biodiversity, on clean water, and we want to make sure that the NGOs, even though the organization names are international, they have a local representation in the area where we want to build partnership from, so that we make sure there's local workers there. There are people who speak our supplier, our producer languages, so that we get into the hearts and mind of them instead of dealing with them just for a commercial relationship. I think that this is some very human advice. And just to come back on how effective of the platform when you engage stakeholders or when you promote worker voice, I think coincidentally, when I personally engage with worker in Indonesia, one of the country in Southeast Asia which have like a very strong worker union regulations, I barely came across huge human rights violation in supply chain, or even if it's huge, it was reported by worker very promptly. So I think the key word is when you enable collective voice, it shifts the mindset of the worker that clean water, safe working environments are checkbox for their employers. No, it's not a checkbox for their employers. How the employer pay the salary on time is not a checkbox. It is actually their rights. They are the center of the implementation. The implementation are not for their employers to be able to sell more. So they become the protectors of their rights instead of the receiver. I think this is the most effective, so far, one of the most effective outcome that work collective voice from workers are resulting in. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Baibun. Colleagues, the intention with this panel discussion was not to present you with a final solution on an issue that is so complicated as this. The intention is to almost lay out a mosaic of the type of issues that need to be factored in when we discuss this and try to take this to a different level, from the very real human rights implications that we heard from Pawundi to the business perspective Kun Baibun outlined, and the type of platform approach you take when you bring the voice of workers into your ear as a business. But that ear may not be enough for Alok from your perspective in terms of meaningful stakeholder engagement and a broader platform that gets to all the points that you mentioned. Sophia, you outlined the government perspectives, how you try to bring transparency, how you try to implement strategies and into law and into regulation, but also how you bring transparency to value and supply chains. So there's a very broad set of issues. Each of them would warrant a long discussion. For each of them, I would love to invite you to bring your thoughts, your ideas, and your perhaps questions for us to go a little bit deeper right away. But while we manage time relatively well, we only have about 5 to 10 minutes for a quick round through the audience. So if you do want to raise any issues bilaterally later, that is very much possible, and I'm sure all our panelists are available to you in this regard. But if there's something burning on your mind straight for this discussion right now, for the plenary, let me take I have one hand on the left, one in the very middle, one half left, and none on the right. None on the right. So I go left first, then middle, then to the second row.
Now, first of all, thanks to the panelists for tackling this very difficult topic as it is. But very quickly, we talked about meaningful stakeholder consultations and engagements, and we keep talking about that in the business and human rights space. And we also mentioned that most of the critical minerals that businesses need for the just transitions come from Africa. And most of the businesses subcontract this work to to some places in Africa, right? And so it's very difficult to trace what part of the supply chain that is more oftentimes. And so my question, as India has now admitted African Union as part of the G20, and things are strengthening between Asia and Africa in general, and there is a social contract because of the shared histories. My question is, how can we strengthen and learn and transfer these learnings between these two continents? I know this is not something that can happen in a day, but just wondering if you have any initial thoughts on how can this transfer really happen among businesses, governments, policymakers, etc. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Victoria. I'm from UNDP Africa, and I would like to raise an interesting point. Gentleman from ETI talked about Ethiopia, how Ethiopia transferred some of the shares of the garment industry that was predominantly here in South Asia to Ethiopia. That happens to be where I live at the moment, and strangely, or not so strangely, the garment industry in Ethiopia was disrupted by the conflict in Tigray, in the region where the majority of the factories were housed. So, and this connects with the question that we just received on minerals, or as in Africa we call it sometimes, conflict minerals. How do you address what happens a lot across the continent and Asian companies? How do you make sure that you do your right due diligence and the mitigation measures in not fueling conflict when you're sourcing from a given country, when you are procuring your supplies in a country where conflict can happen anywhere in the world, but statistics say that the majority of the existing conflicts at the moment are in the African continent. So how do you address that in the global supply chain environment? Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. As a quick heads up to the panelists, if you do want to come in on any of the specific questions and not be volunteered in a minute, please be ready. And at about 10 to 12, I see a colleague with a final third question.
Okay, thank you. So a very quick one. I'm Arif Shah from Greenpeace Southeast Asia. I think in terms of the long history of colonialism and also the capitalism also really growing in these areas in Africa and in Asia, whether you think can we go further to see the business model that those multinational corporation is operating, because sometimes the wealth distributions and also the power distribution should be also taken by the local communities or by the peoples in the ground in that countries, right? So I think we just need to ensure whether this kind of complex supply chains to end of the cycle of the forced labor or trafficking in persons across the sector. I just want to put one really clear example in terms of the leadership of the countries. On the seafood sectors, let's say we have a big fishing nation in Asia. We have also big, I think, coffee production, palm oil production. I do believe if we can bring the leadership and also changing the business models, I think we can doing a lot in Asia and in Africa. But I just want to get your point of view how we can change the business model, the current state of this business model. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That concludes a round of quick questions with perhaps the biggest question. No? The business model ultimately is also a question of the economic model we pursue at the moment, or we are used to live with. But many of my colleagues took active notes, and Alok can't wait to jump in on any of the three questions. Yeah. Please.
So I think both the first two questions that came in terms of learnings from different countries, what is important is to create that opportunities for, first and foremost, the industry associations to come closer. And again, we have seen that if you look at the government case, the Indian Apparel Export Promotion Council and BGMEA coming together and having exchanges with regard to, even on buyers' behaviors. So somewhere we need to create or facilitate those mechanisms where we start, first the discussion at the government level. There is already established structures between Asia and Africa, and especially India hosting a lot of these African countries delegations. So utilizing those forums for business, learning or sharing what each of these countries' businesses are doing would be really, really helpful. Second, on the whole question of conflict area. Now that's a big piece of work which ETI has been doing, and if you look at the whole case around Myanmar, right at the beginning, there were calls for companies to move out of Myanmar and boycott that as a sourcing location. However, what we feel that conflicts are always going to be there, and that's where business and human rights really lays out foundations as to how you need to approach your due diligence. ETI has come out with guidance which looks at the whole conflict area. What should companies be doing? Even if they are exiting, it has to be a responsible exit. It should not be leaving the workers or the suppliers in lurch. Or if they are deciding to continue sourcing from there, then what protocols should be in place so that any human rights violations can be taken care? And certainly, with the conflicts happening all around, it becomes a political issue, and how do you need to navigate that should be a company's policy when it comes to these conflict areas. Thanks.
Thank you. And the work of ETI in this regard, including the guidance, is available online.
Yes.
So colleagues who'd like to go a little bit deeper, this is available through the ETI website as well. But Umdi, you have also been waiting to jump back in.
Yes, I just wanted to just chip in a bit, in addition to what Alok has said. For me, I would say curb corruption. Corruption has destroyed a lot of lives. And now I speak for both the multinationals and the government. There's been this cahoots between government and some multinationals. And most times it leads to a lot of crisis in the communities. And if we can have a policy, like I said, like a roadmap, when you're coming into a place to come and invest, if the government can insist that you show us a roadmap on how you intend, to carry out business, show us the possible human rights implications of your business, and how you're going to take steps to mitigate them before you are given license to operate. It will be essential. And then to also insist, on, instead of raw material value, we have what we call value addition into businesses, whereby whatever materials you are gathering from communities, let them also benefit firsthand from whatever you're getting from their communities. Because it's unfair. And that's one of the beautiful shifts that the country has done recently in the 2023 to 2027 trade policy in Nigeria. It has moved from raw material to value added, where you are expected to process the raw material, build infrastructure within the community where you are getting your raw materials from. Because it will help, to build community resilience. It will help them to feel included in whatever is happening. Because they can also take pride, there is this mineral in my community, and look at the infrastructure that has taken place because of this company coming in. But when you begin to exclude them, you extract these materials and you go away with them, and they are left with pittance. It fuels anxiety. It fuels anger, because they feel shortchanged. They feel they are not, you've come to steal from them. And nobody wants to steal from you, and you'll be smiling at them. Of course, there are bound to be some one or two skirmish and crisis here and there. So if companies can come with clean hands, in law, they say if you come to equity, he who wants equity must come with what? Clean hands. So don't come with dirty hands or hands behind your back. come with clean hands, open, include the communities in whatever you're doing, and see how you can help the community also grow. They will feel like part of the family of your company, and they will help to protect your company. Thank you.
Allow me to give a final word perhaps to Kumbaru, and Sophia would like to come in, and then we'll close, and you will have free way to lunch.
Just want to build up on forced labor. I think from the business point of view, we also want to voice to the government as well that, for example, in Asia, the factors contributing to forced labors are still legal, like, recruitment fee. So even you ask the judge here in Thailand, I would say that's the commercial freedom. If you want to pay for anyone to get you a job, and then it builds up to abuse. It's built up to detaining the people. It's built up to modern slavery. So. For the business point of view, if it's legal, then we almost do not have conversation with the suppliers because they are doing they are complying. Then we're trying to be more creative in, okay, let's build upon the commercial leverage. Let's connect with other brands if they have any kind of initiative with our co-suppliers, so that we can go in that direction in negotiation, in asking them to comply with a higher standard. But then we also get blocked with the competition law as well. So I think this is a new emerging issues, and it's good that some sort of law like competition law are very stringent in order to prohibit for the other greater goods, of course, but it somehow prevents us to also tackling our problems as long as, a lot of factors are still legal in every countries. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Kumbaru. I think the key issue in a way that transpires is transparency. That's the breeding ground. The lack of transparency is the breeding ground for corruption and for the type of issues, Barundi, that you mentioned. Sophia, you would have the final word of our panel for this day.
Thank you. Our national strategy is to serve the preventing the human rights violation, and then with this for all sector, and also we try with this national strategy. Include mining and garment and every kind of factory, but the national strategy is not include the whole, but we try to manage the national strategy to effort to be implemented to the whole company, and it's not easy, but we try. Because if we don't have a regulation, I think the company is not easy to make the due diligence and prepare how to manage the company to be a human rights standard. Because, and also the national strategy is we prepare to preventing. If there is a human rights violation, how the company has a commitment to be prepared for the remedy, and also how to prepare to make a better next step for the company. That's all.
Thank you very much, Sophia. Colleagues, as I indicated, the intention here is much more to lay out the mosaic of issues. What we all learned in childhood, I think, is not to eat and talk at the same time. But you may want to take a couple of these topics to lunch and talk them further into further detail. For the moment, let me just ask you all for an applause for our panel today. Thank you very much. And my personal thanks to all four of you for the very different but very complementary perspectives that I think help us to get a much fuller picture